Welcome to the first international conference on the Muslim Ummah. We're so pleased to have you with us as we inaugurate this first conference in the next 3 days. And welcome to the campus of Istanbul Sabah ad-Din Zaim University, a university that is dedicated to great education as well as serious scholarship. And welcome to the inaugural activity of the Center for Islam and Global Affairs, CIGA. It's a new center that has been established by the university, dedicated to the study of Muslim societies as well as to the relationship between the Muslim world and global powers, and the impact on Muslims and Muslim societies in the world at large. We are very pleased that you are with us and you honored us with your presence. We have people who came, this wasn't planned, but we are so pleased that there is so much interest and shows that this conference is timely. We have people coming from the Americas, the US, Canada, as well as Europe and across the Muslim world. That means there's a lot of interest among people across the world in these kind of topics that we are going to discuss in the next 3 days. We have invited over 25 speakers coming again from all over the world to discuss these issues that affect the lives of millions. We are pleased to have among us Professor John Esposito, a world-renowned expert on Islam, author of dozens of books, who's recognized as the premier expert in the United States on issues related to Islam, Muslim societies, as well as relationship between Islam, the world of Islam, and the West. We're pleased to have among us Professor Richard Falk. Professor Esposito, of course, is from Georgetown University and the former director of the Al-Walid Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding. Professor Richard Falk is also a renowned scholar who was at Princeton University and now at the University of California in Santa Barbara, as well as he was a commissioner or a person in charge of, from the United Nations, on the situation in Palestine, human rights situation in Palestine, and also has dozens of books on many issues related to the Muslim world as well as to the Palestinian issue. We're very pleased to have him with us. We're also pleased to have with us Professor Emad Shahin, the Dean of the College of Islamic Studies at Hamad bin Khalifa University, who's also a renowned scholar in political science and in issues related to politics in the Middle East. We're also pleased to have among us Professor Flint Leverett, a Penn State University professor, expert on the Middle East, China, energy, and others, as well as having an extensive experience in American government in issues related to the Muslim world, was also resigned because he had a different opinion and opposition by his government when they invaded Iraq in 2003. We're also pleased to have with us Professor Jonathan Brown from also Georgetown University and the current director of the Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding. And he also is an expert on Islamic history and religion and has many books credited to him. They are sitting in the first row, but we also have many other professors, over 20 of them, as I said, Professor Asma Afsaruddin from Indiana University, also an expert on Islamic studies and Islamic sciences. I'm going to read them in alphabetical order. Professor Abdullah Al-Arian, he is also a historian and professor of history at Georgetown in Doha, Qatar. Professor Ovamir Anjum, who is a professor at the University of Toledo. Professor Ahmed Farouk Aysan, who is now the dean of the School of Economics at Shahin University, is also a former governor of the Central Bank of Turkey. Professor Abbas Barzigar, who is a professor at Georgia State University, also specialized in religious studies. Professor Omar Shaha, who is the current dean in political science and the chairman of the political science department at our university. Professor Abdel Fattah Al-Awaisi, who's also a professor of political science at ISO. Dr. Hussein ElKazzaz, who is the director of the Insan Center for Civilizational Studies. Mr. Jamal Al-Shayal, who is a correspondent of Al Jazeera English. Dr. Arif Ersoy, the vice president of Istanbul Zaim University and professor of economics at this university. Dr. Hiba Raouf Izzat, professor of political science at Ibn Khaldun University. Dr. Dalia Fahmi, a professor of political science at Long Island University. Dr. Nader Hashimi, the director of Middle East Center for Middle East Studies at University of Denver, also a political scientist. Dr. Asifa Quraishi Landis, a professor of law and Islamic law at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. Dr. Sohaira Siddiqui is also a religious scholar and a professor at Georgetown University in Doha, Qatar. And Dr. Umar Tashgeterin, who is professor of political science at our university, and Dr. Ismail Nu'man Telji, a professor of political science at Sakarya. And of course, with us also, Dr. Tariq Ramadan, who will be with us tomorrow, who is professor at Oxford University, as well as Hamad bin Khalifa University in Qatar. These are the scholars that you will be engaging with in the next 3 days. Take opportunity to engage them, to talk with them, benefit from their scholarship and from their knowledge. As in every conference, sometimes you would have one or two people who would have circumstances that would be beyond their control. We have this today, and that is the situation with Dr. Salim Argun, who has just been appointed as the Vice President of Diyanat. And he came yesterday, he was with us this morning, and he has been recalled to Ankara immediately. Now you can guess. So we're missing one of our speakers in the opening session, unfortunately, but inshallah we'll try to make it up. We also have today with us our president and the two co-sponsors who will address you shortly. This idea of this conference came also, we were approached at one point by a doctor in England, Mahmoud Akif, was with us. And we took the idea because we also were thinking at the same long lines, and we made it into an academic conference, and it came at the same time that we were thinking about this center. The Center for Islam and Global Affairs is a center that came out of the idea that we need to look at what's happening in Muslim societies, around the Muslim world, in the whole world, and see how we can have working research groups to address these issues. So we established this center with 4 departments in mind. The first department is a department to study Muslim societies. At the epistemological and philosophical level, things that as Muslims people have taken for granted, at certain point they had certain meanings. the concept of the Ummah, the concept of jihad. And what do they mean today? When we talk about the nation-state system, do they still hold the same meaning, or do they have different meanings? At the systems and models level, what does the institution of zakat mean? Institution of waqf, institution of hisbah. What do we mean by talking about women empowerment? What are the principles of what is called Islamic economics? Do we just take a capitalist system and use some Islamic terms to make it Islamic economics, or do we go deeper? And the third issue or topic within this department are fault lines within the Islamic world. The challenge of sectarianism, nationalism, secularism, civilian military relations, non-Muslim minorities, and so on and so forth. So all these issues we will be discussing during this conference. So the first session, session 1, will discuss this meaning of the Ummah. Does it have other meanings than what we historically understand? The second session will talk about political legitimacy. The first session will have Dr. Sohaira Siddiqui, Dr. Arif Ersoy, and Dr. Hussein ElKazzaz. Second session will talk about the conditions for political legitimacy. Again, we have a historical concept, this Khilafah that stayed from the 1st century until early last century, ending with the Ottoman Empire with 400 years. Where does political legitimacy come from today? How is it related again to this changing of the nation-state system? That session will be addressed tomorrow morning with 3 excellent speakers, Dr. Anjum, Dr. Fahmi, and Dr. Shahin. The third session will talk about global challenges facing the Muslim world. The challenge of hegemony, addressed by Dr. Falk. The challenge of wars and terrorism, addressed by Dr. Leverett. And the challenge of Islamophobia, addressed by Dr. Esposito. I'll be joining them also to discuss the challenge of settler colonialism in Palestine, Israel. The fourth session will address the issue of the role of Islamic law in Muslim societies. Again, we have a historic notion, a historic understanding of the role of Sharia because of the way the Muslim world developed throughout the centuries. With the emergence of the nation-state system, what does that mean today? We know what happened in Egypt when they were discussing the Constitution 2012, 2013, how that was a divisive issue that may have eventually doomed this nascent experience of having free political system where people can express their opinions, form parties, participate in their own governance. So this issue also will be addressed through 3 excellent scholars, Jonathan Brown, Asifa Qurashi-Landis, and Tariq Ramadan. This will be our 4th session. All the 3 sessions will be tomorrow. The 5th session on Tuesday morning will address socio-economic issues in the Muslim world. The first is the issue of productivity, poverty, where the majority of the Muslim world are suffering today. This will be addressed by Professor Ahmed Farouk Aysan. The second will be addressed by our president, which I haven't introduced yet, I will, Dr. Bulut, who's very well known in this campus, who's also an expert on economic history and the brain behind Islamic economic discipline here in our campus. He will be addressing Islamic development in the age of globalism and global development. The third and fourth speakers will be addressing the issue which is very important from a socio-economic point of view, the issue of empowerment of women and youth. And it will be addressed also by 2 experts, Professor Omar Shaha, who's written several books in the issue, especially in the experience of women movements here in Turkey, and Professor Asma Afsaruddin, who I introduced earlier, and she will also be talking about the empowerment of both women and youth. The sixth and final session would address fault lines in the Muslim world. The challenge of sectarianism would be addressed by Professor Nader Hashimi from the University of Denver. The issue of secularism would be addressed by Professor Hiba Raouf Izzat from Ibn Khaldun. The issue of nationalism by Dr. Abdullah Al-Arian from Georgetown University in Qatar. And the last one would be about civilian-military relations. We do have a public session. That public session would be at Yahya Kamal Bayatle Convention Center on Tuesday. That would be open to the public, as this is a venue where the number of seats were limited. That one would be much open to the public, and also both Arabic and Turkish translations would be available. We will be joined by 3 prolific, well-known speakers, as you all know. Now, this conference is, as I said, been organized by CIGA and ESO, but we also have co-sponsors. We are very pleased to have 2 very important, well-known, renowned institutions to be with us. The Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding, which was founded by Professor Esposito, and the succeeding director is Professor Jonathan Brown, and the College of Islamic Studies at Hamad bin Khalifa University. Both are co-sponsors of this conference. We certainly hope that this conference would be an annual event. We can bring scholars every year to discuss these very important and other issues. Our first session was supposed to be moderated by Professor Muhammad Musa from our university. Unfortunately, he is sick and bedridden, and we wish him full and speedy recovery. So that's why I am moderating this session in his place. We will have a few words from our president, Dr. Mehmet Bulut, welcoming you, followed by Dr. Emad Shahin, the Dean of the College of Islamic Studies in Doha for Hamad bin Khalifa, followed by Dr. Jonathan Brown, the director of the center. I also want to acknowledge a lot of people joining us here who came from different places and who have different backgrounds. Thank you so much for joining us and for coming. We've just been joined, I believe, by Dr. Ahmed Hasna. Yes? Yes. Very well. He is the dean, he's the president of the university of Hamad bin Khalifa University. And I want to say that after the first session, after the welcoming remarks by our 3 distinguished presidents and directors and deans, we'll have the first session. That session will be on the Muslim Ummah, will be chaired by Dr. Sohaira Siddiqui. After that, we will have signing ceremony. We're very pleased to announce that we'll have signing ceremony of Memorandum of Understanding of Cooperation between the 2 great institutions, our university and Hamad bin Khalifa University. This particular Memorandum of Understanding would be signed by both presidents, Dr. Hasna and Dr. Bulut, and they will be introduced at the proper time after the first session. So I would like to call for the DS Dr. Bulut, Dr. Shahin, and Dr. Brown. In your packet, you should have, and if you don't have it, you can definitely get it, You'll have the conference program. It has the biography of all the speakers, so we're not going to repeat the biographies. Please read them. Again, these are very prominent scholars. We also have the abstracts of the talks. And the way that the talks would be run is that each speaker will have a few minutes to present their remarks, followed by the discussant, in which they, the moderator or the discussant will give their reflections. Then we'll have a dialogue or a conversation. Then it will be opened up for the audience. I just want to first acknowledge our president, Dr. Mehmet Bulut. Again, his biography is here. Well-accomplished scholar, president of the university that he started 4 years ago with less than 1,500 students, and today, mashallah, we have like 9,000 students. Dr. Bulut.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Distinguished guests from all of the world, dear Dr. Esna, the president of Hamad bin Khalifa University, Professor Esposito from Georgetown, Professor Falk from Santa Barbara, Dr. Emad from Hamad bin Khalifa, and Jonathan Brown from Georgetown University, dear deans, professors, my colleagues fled from Penn State, and ladies and gentlemen, if I missed somebody of you, please accept my excuse. I am very proud to have you in this kind of event here today on the issue of Islamic Ummah, the future of Islamic Ummah. In the beginning of my speech, I would like to thank to all of you for being here today with us and concentrate on this very important issue of the world today. And secondly, I would like to thank to the organizers of this event and this conference. First of all, Professor Sami Al-Arian, the director of Center for Islam and Global Affairs at ISU. He is doing very well. This is his first organization. I really would like to thank in front of all of you, strongly thanks for this very good organization, and to the supporters of the conference, Dr. Emad Shahin, Hamad bin Khalifa University, their support, and Georgetown University, Professor Jonathan Brown, and also the other sponsors. I would like to thank to all of them for their support of this event. So this conference is now happening in a very critical dates. In recent years, in recent decades, the heart of Islamic world, the heart of Islamic world is Mecca and Medina. I know maybe you think there is no any problem there. So another heart of Islamic world is Jerusalem, Beitul Maqdis. And around these three very important cities of Islam and Islamic Ummah, we faced with very serious crisis in recent decades. All the day the people are dying, killing, but the Muslim Ummah do not take any action, and we are just looking. Every night we are looking to the television, to the news. Day by day it becomes like a normal diary or film. And we lost our, the feelings, the real believings, and maybe we lost our responsibilities, I am afraid. Something has happened, but our responsibility is very strong. We cannot do anything. So, today, tomorrow, and after tomorrow, we will discuss these issues. What we can do, and what we have to do. This region, the center of Islamic world, for a long time, it was the center of the world's civilizations, as you know. Fertile crescent around Mediterranean. It was the center of the world's civilizations from the beginning of human beings. It continued till the European expansion in the beginning of early modern times. We can say till the beginning of 16th century, the Mediterranean region was the center of the world economy, the science, technology, and political issues. And then this center moved first to Western Europe and then to other part of Atlantic. Something started to change from the 16th and 17th centuries. I would like to stress that our issue in these 3 days we will discuss is starting at that times. From the beginning of 16th century, a new system was established in the world. And the humanity, first time, faced with this system. It was established by the Westerners. They also rejected their tradition, not only Islamic heritage, and we called Qadim civilizations, they also rejected their own Christian traditions. And we faced with a new paradigm, is seeing economy from a different perspective, looking to the political issues from different perspective, looking to the humanity and human being from a different perspective. And this system, centered by Western Europeans, then expanded to Africa, to Asia, and to America. And they started to control all resources of the production. Day by day, year by day, and age by age, we came that they took under their control all part of the world, except the Ottoman Empire. I know some of you are disagree with me now, but I would stress it again. Except the Ottoman Empire, the capitalist system in the early modern times took control all of the world. But the Ottomans continued their traditional system in the region, in between Europe, Asia, and Africa. They followed their own economic policies, social policies, and they followed their own political system. And their aims in economy, in social life, were different than this new paradigm in the Western society. This system was living together as a neighbor with this system in Europe. This is a very big issue that the historians and social scientists still didn't give the answer how the Ottoman Empire continued till the beginning of 20th century. This is still is waiting researchers from history, from social science. It's still answered. The question is still open. How this new system in the world took control in all of the world, but the Ottomans were living together with the Europeans, very close to them, but they could not take any control on the Ottoman Empire. I am finishing my speech by stressing that the last representative of this Ottoman system was Abdul Hamid II. That guy was established this school. We are now in his school. This was Ottoman Agricultural College and Veterinary School. It was established by Abdul Hamid II. From that time, from 19th century, this school is a high school. We have a sentence in our booklet, you will see, we are coming from Nobel Prize past to bright future. So now I am trying to connect you when the Abdul Hamid II was resigned from throne in 1909, before the beginning of First World War. Then the situation of Islamic Ummah started to change. Till that time, this world system was playing its role in all of the world. And the Muslim Ummah were living in a different situation till that time, but after that time, we faced with very serious difficulties, starting from the heart of Islam till Balkans. Now we call this Middle East. It was West Asia till that time, but now it's Middle East. So from the First World War till today, all this geography is crying. Every day people are killing, they are dying, and we cannot do anything. So, inshallah, I hope after this conference, as a scholars, responsible scholars in social science, we will concentrate on real issues, on economics, what we can do for better economic relations among the Muslim countries and in between the Muslim countries and the global economic powers. And we will concentrate our research on the political international relations among the Muslim countries, nation states, and in between the Muslim Ummah and the global economic political powers of the world. And I hope we will also concentrate for the future of Islamic Ummah on the young generation, on women issues, on child issues, on education, on all aspects of problems in Islamic world. And last but not least, I think and I hope we will recover again the message of Islam and the last messenger of Islam, his messages and the message of Quran, what they are saying for us today, and how we can solve our own problems and the problems of the world, how we can contribute to all the problems in the world. Thank you so much again for being us today with this very important event and conference. And again, I am saying that I hope a good and successful conference here at ISO. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Bulut, for these remarks. Our next welcoming speaker is Dr. Emad Shahin, the Dean of the College of Islamic Studies at Hamad bin Khalifa University. He was also a professor at many other universities around the world, including Harvard, Georgetown, Notre Dame, and American University in Cairo. Dr. Shahin.
Thank you very much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good evening, everyone. Dr. Bulut, Dr. Hasda, dear colleagues and friends, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the College of Islamic Studies at Hamad bin Khalifa University, I'm so pleased to extend my sincerest congratulations to my colleagues here at IZU for the momentous events that we are witnessing this evening. In fact, the College of Islamic Studies is deeply honored to be part of 3 landmark events. The first one is the inauguration of the first international conference on the Muslim Ummah, in which we are a co-sponsor. The second event is the foundation of the Center for Islam and Global Affairs, CIGA. And finally, the signing of a collaboration agreement between Istanbul Zaim University and Hamad bin Khalifa University. The conference that we are attending today cannot be more timely. As Dr. Bulut referred in his remarks, I just would like you to go back 100 years ago, circa 1916, 1917, and you see striking similarities between the state of the Muslim Ummah then and now. Just to mention a few examples: internal weakness and ineffectiveness, foreign domination and hegemony, revolts and violence, forced economic integration, great expectations, and greater frustrations. Eventually, an entire order collapsed by 1919 onwards, giving way to a new one under the formula of the nation state and foreign mandates. This formula can no longer sustain. This conference and our gathering today is extremely important in this regard. It highlights our responsibility as intellectuals to assess the challenges the Ummah is facing and develop a vision for the way forward. The College of Islamic Studies at Hamad bin Khalifa University is at the forefront of contemporary Islamic studies in the region, and we are looking forward to cooperating with CIGA and IZU on joint research programs to produce high quality and impactful research that can lead to the progress of Muslim societies. At the College of Islamic Studies, we have 4 active research centers: the Center for Islamic Economics and Finance, the Center for Islamic Legislation and Ethics, CIGA, the Center for Muslim Contribution to Civilization, and Al-Qaradawi Center for Islamic Moderation and Renewal. Recently, we have established a new research division at our college to amalgamate all research endeavors at CIS at the college under one roof to create various research clusters. Ladies and gentlemen, on this particular occasion, Hamad bin Khalifa University and Istanbul Zaim University will soon sign a 4-year partnership agreement to collaborate on graduate level education, student exchange, and joint research. In fact, today's event is the first of such activity under the agreement. The agreement that Dr. Bulut and Dr. Hasna will sign shortly seeks to enrich our academic programs, particularly in the fields of Islamic finance, banking, and economics. It will also enable the exchange of students and faculty in these fields. It highlights our commitment to unite scholars and thought leaders from around the globe to enhance our programs. Both institutions will jointly organize symposia, seminars, and conferences, and also provide support by participating in each other's events where feasible. The College of Islamic Studies is looking forward to our cooperation, and we thank both presidents for making this happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shahin. Our final speaker for this session is Dr. Jonathan Brown, the director of the Walid Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding at Georgetown University.
Good evening, everybody. Assalamu alaikum. Thanks very much for inviting us. On behalf of the Georgetown delegation, I'm delighted to be here, and I'm very grateful to the organizers for having put so much effort into to this event. Previously, you've heard about the importance of the questions we're discussing, and as the director of the Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding, I'm also happy to have the founding director and my mentor, Dr. Esposito, here. I think it's tough to get him to come to a conference, so I think it shows the importance of the topic. I mean, we're very happy to be here and participate, and we're excited to be here at the inauguration or celebration of this Center for Islam and Global Affairs, which I think has as much promise as its logo is nice. I love the color scheme. I'm sort of giving our logo a run for the money, or for its money. I've actually been spending a lot of time in Turkey recently, although interestingly my Turkish seems to be getting worse. I don't really understand how that's working, but just maybe a month and a half ago I was here, and it was my birthday, actually, my 40th birthday, and we were in Trabzon. Me and my family were in Trabzon, and I was thinking about, now I'm 40 years old, I've reached Sin Rushd, and I was thinking about how wonderful it is to be a professor in a university where you get to keep learning your whole life. And I also was reflecting on something else wonderful, I think, about growing older as a scholar, and that's seeing how your relationships develop over time and how they blossom, and how those people you meet when you're young, 10 years go by, 15 years go by, you see how those relationships blossom, what you learn from them, what kind of cooperation you have. And it was just maybe 4 years ago that Dr. Bulut happened to be in Washington, D.C. He accepted my invitation to lunch, and I had no idea that 4 years later, we'd be sitting in the garden at the university here. And by the way, if you haven't been there, you have to go and see the main gardens of the university. They're absolutely beautiful. We were sitting there having a wonderful breakfast while my kids were tormenting the cats and chasing after birds and things like that. And I would have had no idea 4 years ago that we'd be here cooperating on this wonderful conference and inaugurating this terrific center. And I think about how much I've benefited from my relationship with Turkish scholars over the years, and I think this is something that American scholars of Islamic studies, across the board recognizes how rich our relationships are with Turkish scholarship. And I see Dr. Murtaza Bedr over there, who I met, I don't know how many years ago, and how much I've learned from him over the years. And I'm just looking forward, God willing, to many more years of productive cooperation, to cooperating with this university at the level of student, at the level of professors, and coming back again and again, hopefully, to keep addressing these important issues. Thank you very much.
In full disclosure, his sons are my grandsons. Jonathan is my son-in-law. But we're very grateful, of course, for their cooperation and for their involvement in this conference. Also, before we start the next session, I want to thank our staff and volunteers for a wonderful job they did in organizing this conference. Thank you. We'll start our first session. Thank you so much for the plenary session and for our speakers. I'd like to call to the DS.
It's a pleasure to be here to start the first session today. So as we've already heard from a few individuals that the Muslim world is in trouble, it seems. When I approach that question, it's quite fascinating because there's a plethora of literature in Western scholarship about this question of crisis. This question was actually posed a long time ago, is Islam in crisis? And at least for me, I see this entire conference as an outworking of that fundamental question. Is Islam in crisis? If so, then how do we solve that crisis? So those who answer the question in the affirmative usually do so from the lens of authority, arguing that yes, Islam is in crisis, and it is in crisis not only because there is an absence of a single authority, but that because that absence has led to the proliferation of competing authorities. One of the most cogent arguments from this perspective was put forward by the historian of Islam, Richard Bulut, in 2002. I'm just going to read 2 paragraphs from his argument. He states, "Today's growing crisis is in part out of the structure of Islam itself, a faith without denomination, hierarchies, and centralized institutions. The absence of such structures has been a source of strength that has permitted the faith to adapt to local conditions and win converts around the world, but it is also a weakness that makes it difficult for Muslims to come together and speak with one voice on important issues, that is to say, what is and what is not truly Islam. Islam's structural weakness has been immeasurably magnified by a series of historical forces that have gradually compromised the authority of traditional religious leaders in the Middle East and elsewhere. The imams and muftis who once shaped the worldview of ordinary Muslims have become overshadowed by more innovative and often radical figures with much shallower roots in tradition. The crisis has 3 interrelated historical causes. The first is the marginalization of traditional Muslim authorities over the past century. The second is the rise of new authorities with inferior credentials, but greater skills using print and more recently electronic media. And the third is the spread of mass literacy in the Muslim world, which made the challengers' writings accessible to vast new audiences." End quote. For Bulut, the crisis of authority that Islam is currently facing is the product of the very structure of Islam, which rejects, according to him, denominations, hierarchies, and centralized institutions. This structure of Islam, which accommodated diversity historically, is simply unable to cope with the sheer amount of diversity brought about by the rise of new authorities, print media, and mass literacy. The absence of authority for onlookers is seen most prominently with regards to the Sharia and questions regarding the future of Muslim politics. In an article by Wa'il Hallaq published shortly after Bulut's article in 2004, he argues that traditional institutions and individuals which constituted the Sharia have been rendered derelict, and there is little hope for any revival of the classical mode of the Sharia without completely reimagining Muslim communities in modernity. At the same time, his prognosis for Muslim politics is likewise bleak. While I agree with the questions that both Bulut and Hallaq raise regarding the proliferation of authorities, the shifts within the Sharia and modernity, and the challenges of Muslim politics, in order to address these difficult questions, we must avoid starting from the position of structural deficiencies and/or defects. This conference is born out of this realization and seeks to investigate these questions from an internal vantage point, which acknowledges competing perspectives and differing ideologies. In this sense, this conference seeks to answer questions about Muslims and the future of Muslim politics, identity, and law from the tradition itself. In Alistair MacIntyre's book, Whose Justice and Which Rationality, he makes a compelling argument for analyzing concepts such as justice and reason from within intellectual traditions. To this end, he states, and I quote, "A conception of rational inquiry as embodied in a tradition is a conception according to which the standards of rational justification themselves emerge from and are part of a history in which they are vindicated by the way in which they transcend the limitations of and provide remedies for the defects of their predecessors within the limits of that same tradition." If we extend this principle to the question of authority, law, politics, and community, then any investigation into these questions must be situated within that tradition that bears them. Only then can they be fully understood and compared to other traditions in a rigorous and methodologically sound manner. In this session titled The Muslim Ummah Re-examining the Concept and Developing a New Paradigm, we begin with an investigation into the Ummah itself, its historical importance, and the prospects for its future use. This is perhaps the most fitting panel to begin with, not only because the conference is titled International Conference on the Ummah, but because in recent scholarship, questions regarding the Ummah are at the forefront of academic discourse. Though many important books will come to mind on the subject, two recent ones I think are especially worthy of mention and I hope we will engage in our discussion. The first is Mona Hassan's Longing for the Lost Caliphate, which investigates the social, cultural, and religious reactions to the fall of the Abbasids in 1258 and the formal abolishment of the Ottoman Caliphate in 1924. Hassan argues that both events constitute a trauma, if you will, in the Muslim imagination, wherein the institution seen as representative of the Muslim community simply ceased to exist. Notwithstanding the critiques of the development of the caliphate historically, Hassan argues that it was an important symbol for the Muslim community and one whose loss generated a considerable amount of anxiety. This anxiety to her continues until this day, wherein contestations over the form of Muslim politics occupy center stage in both Muslim minority and majority countries. The second book is Jamil Aydin's The Idea of a Muslim World, and in some sense he picks up where Hassan left off and investigates the concept of a Muslim world as invoked in the West, as a term to categorize and understand the Muslim other. He argues that the idea of a Muslim world is an ahistorical illusion which originated in the 19th century with the rise of European imperialism and the response by Muslim intellectuals to a racialized identity that simply reduced them to a single identifiable group. What is perhaps most ironic for him is that the idea of a distinct Muslim civilization with definitive immutable characteristics in all four corners of the world became cherished by both Islamophobes and pan-Islamists alike. The attraction for Islamophobes was clear. It enabled them to reduce Islam and easily classify Muslims. But the attraction by pan-Islamists was more perplexing. According to Aydin, pan-Islamists were attracted to the idea precisely because the notion of a Muslim community, or ummah, was a powerful image in the Muslim imagination, such that the distinction between the ummah as it was invoked in Islamic history and the notion of a Muslim world as it developed through imperial politics was simply blurred. Though Hassan and Aydin are analyzing distinct historical events from different methodological perspectives, both books in the end emphasize the centrality of questions relating to the community and unity throughout the development of Islamic history. Whether it be reactions to the fall of the Abbasids or the Ottomans, or it be reactions to colonialism and the rise of nation-states, questions of the Ummah stand at the center. The presenters in this panel will seek to provide a better historical understanding of the concept of the Ummah, problematize it, and suggest paradigms for its future employment. The two presenters are Dr. Arif Ersoy, and he will be presenting on the current state of the Muslim Ummah, and I will ask him to speak first. And our second presenter will be Dr. Hussein ElKazzaz from the Insan Center for Islamic Civilizations, and his paper is titled A New Paradigm for the Ummah at an Epistemological Level. So without further ado, I turn it over to Dr. Ersoy.
Bu yanlış olmuş ya. Yanlış. Ha, ya. Tamam olsun. Ya olsun. Ben burada şey yapayım.
Yansımasın mı?
Yok, oraya yansımasın istersen. Dear President, dear Chancellor, dear distinguished scholar from all over the world, ladies and gentlemen, I call Selamun Alaikum. Peace be upon you. Today here, we are arranging an important meeting, a study concerning humanity. We are living in a turning point, historical turning point. 2/3 of the world is very poor. Millions of people are under severe conditions. We are now facing wars and conflicts in our region. According to Islamic belief, in such turning point in history, what does it mean, turning point in history? The prevailing system, if it couldn't solve problem, if it create problems, we call this a turning point in history. Before Muhammad alayhi salam, in such case, in such situation, Allah sent prophets. And prophet came and invite people to Tawheed and Adalah. Increase their consciousness about Tawheed and Adalah. Then if people change themselves, the problems will be solved. But we do believe, after Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, there will be no any prophet will come. He is the last prophet. What will happen in such a case, in turning historical point? The scholar of that time, who do believe in Tawhid and Adalah, will come together and try to produce solutions how to solve the prevailing problems. Because scholar ulama are vicegerent of prophets. Now, the prevailing system is producing problems. According to Ibn Khaldun, when a system, institutions couldn't solve problem, that means they are ill. When they are producing problems, that means they are going to die out. As you know, socialism at the end of last century couldn't produce prevailing problems, created new problems, and it collapsed down. Today, the monopolistic financial capitalism is producing problems. These wars and conflicts in our region are produced by this system. Owing to this reason, we should try to find out new solutions how we will solve the prevailing problems. You know why capitalism is producing problems? I am not saying Westerners are doing that. The system is doing that. Because system is based on conflicting interest approach. The theory of system depends on conflicting interest approach. They do believe struggle is going on everywhere. When you have two sides or many sides struggling, at the end, the powerful side will gain. The powerful side will determine law of game, will determine everything, will determine cost and benefit sharing principles. And owing to this reason, they put their own interest at the first place. Later, and they design the system according to their interest. Today, few monopolistic firms or circles are determining all decisions which are shaping our time. The Islamic geography is located, as you know, at the center of the world. As long as peace is not being established in this geography, it is not possible to reach peace at the global level. Today, the prevailing proxy wars in some regions and countries of Islamic geography has caused the death and injuries of hundreds of thousands of Muslims, innocent people, children. These conflicts and struggle have paved the ways for millions of people to leave their own land and become refugees in foreign countries. This unprecedented tragedy in human history has produced by the unfair present world order, designed and ruled by capitalist monopolistic circle. This also is affecting not only Muslim, all humanity. As you know, 2 years ago, 90% movement in Western countries, they said, we are in a bad position. We are also affected by this system. The present unfair world order, as I mentioned before, could lost its ability of problem solving. It is producing problems. Since the existing monopolist, colonial, and fraudulent world order, Islamic geography cannot attain stability and peace. Because this monopolistic and colonial current global order does not produce solutions for the economic and political problems of our time. This unfair world order has impoverished the 2/3 of the world and has always produced problems, artificial conflicts over the last 3 centuries. It produced deadly weapons. Also, it's produced terrorism. Let me tell you, terrorism is product of monopolistic system, capitalist system. Poverty is product of this system. Today, this racist monopolist order is spending all its effort to survive by producing problems and clashes at the global level. The duty of scholar to find out how we can establish and peace, solidarity at the global level. The present world order is, as I said, based on conflicting interests. They believe our gain is loss of others. And owing to this reason, all the time, wherever they go, they create conflicting problems. And they encourage struggle, conflicts between different groups of people. The powerful side in this mentality has always the chance of obtaining more benefits from these relations, and weak side cannot get its right. Because the rules of the game have been determined by the powerful nations according to their interests. That is a monopolitical world order. 5 monopolistic countries are running all world. This is not democratic. This is not fair. Owing to this reason, here we should rethink how we will solve the problem of our time. The present-day structure of the International Institute are organized and shaped after the Second World War by victorious 3 or 4 nations. The structure designed and shaped by these monopolistic power according to their own interest. Muslims established a civilization of peace in our geography. And at the beginning of 7th century, Muslim under the leadership of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, established the Medina city-state by bringing Muslim, non-Muslim, Jews, Christians, and even atheists together with the social contract called the Medina document. We call it Medina Vesika. This social contract is accepted as the first written constitution, which had brought different people of different religious culture and race, established first time in human history, unity with diversity. The following Muslim states did the same thing. And Ottoman state was the largest state in human history, which ruled many people with different religions, different race, and with different culture, in peace and harmony. Because this state is based on mutual harmonic approach. Owing to this reason, we need this paradigm to establish a new world order. This world order, as you know, it is out of date. We couldn't leave the world for monopolistic power to exploit our resources. Owing to this reason, the prevailing problems of Muslim world or global problems have been produced by colonial mentality. Colonial mentality means we are powerful, we are rightful people, we are right. This mentality is mentality of pharaohs. This mentality is mentality of Athens aristocracy. This mentality is mentality of ancient Roman mentality. We couldn't rule and solve the prevailing problem by this mentality today. Owing to this reason, there is a need to change a paradigm. The prevailing paradigm should be changed. As long as this paradigm is prevailing, we couldn't solve problems of world as well as Muslim world. Because this mentality created war, conflicts during recent 3 centuries. And they used terrorist activities in order to produce new problems, and by people of the world dealing with problems, they exploited great part of the world. The prevailing problems of Muslim world have been produced by this mentality. Owing to this reason, we couldn't wait that Western powers, monopolistic power, will come and help us. we should take them out of the Muslim world, because they are exploiting our resources. They are killing our people. Take Syria. How a man which has, sense of peace, how he can accept this situation? They divided the people of country in two groups, and they supported both groups with weapons. They are killing each other. They are dropping weapons from sky, and they are getting money. Humanity hadn't faced any such cruelty in human history. I think my time is going quickly. Let me go a bit quickly. Why the present international world order creates problem? Because its paradigm is based on conflicting interests. How we can solve this problem? We should put, instead of this paradigm, mutual harmonic interest approach paradigm. This paradigm is explained by all prophets. All prophets of God, they call people to an adala. Then they try to establish peace. We should take this paradigm as a center. By establishing this paradigm, we will use world resources efficiently, because this paradigm is based on mutual aid. Peace is essential according to this paradigm. And we will establish a new world, which all humanity's problem will be solved. Here, I am calling all believers. Believers in Noah, believer in Abraham, Moses, Jesus, believing in Muhammad alayhi salam. It is time to come together to establish peace. The road map of peace is Islam. All these prophets are prophets of Islam. We do believe in all these problems. Moses is prophet of Islam. Abraham is prophet of Islam according to the Quran. Jesus is prophet of Islam. Owing to this reason, the way of solving the prevailing problems, we should come together and re-establish a new world. This duty is duty of ulama, scholars. Thanks Allah that give this opportunity to speak here and to let know your duty. You know it. If our science, if our knowledge is not prevailing, is not creating solutions for prevailing problems, if we couldn't contribute to establish peace, what does it mean having more knowledge? Knowledge will be meaningful if we solve problem of humanity and try to establish peace and order. I wish success for all of you. I hope we will contribute peace and prosperity for all humanity. Islamic system means system of peace. It is not only for Muslim, rahmatan lil alamin, for everybody. Islam is road map of the peace. Without following principles of Islam, it hasn't been possible to produce peace. First time in human history, Noah prophet produced peace in Mesopotamian city-state. Later, under the leadership of Prophet Abraham, Moses, David, and Solomon, established peaceful civilization in this geography. Later on, Prophet Jesus tried to establish a peaceful environment, putting the ethic in front. Then Muhammad, peace be upon him, he came and established Medina state and also established, put foundation of Islamic civilization, civilization of peace. I hope as a scholar in future we will come together like today and bring our knowledge together and produce new solutions how we can solve problem of our time. Again, thank you very much for coming to Istanbul. Istanbul is an important city. I hope in the past, as we played for peace and prosperity, in the future, together, we will do this duty. I ask Allah, this step should be one important step for this aim. Thank you for coming. Assalamu alaikum.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Since I'm going to be talking about pursuing a new paradigm for the concept of Ummah, let's just agree on one fundamental point so we have the right expectations. Paradigms are not pursued by exceptional scholars working on them in closed rooms. That's not what happens. Paradigms develop when these exceptional scholars interact with real life, when these exceptional scholars follow the questions that people on the ground in this particular domain are facing. So what I'm trying to do today is identify a number of areas in which I think the concept of Ummah is very relevant. And then maybe together try to pose a few serious questions about the concept of Ummah in each one of these domains or areas, and hence hopefully advance our way of thinking about the concept of Ummah, because paradigms develop this way. And since many of us here belong to the academic world one way or the other, so I'll also try to suggest a few ideas for research that may relate to some of these areas. Thank you very much. And the first domain that I think the concept of Ummah is very relevant for is this whole idea of affiliation. It comes directly from the basic meanings of Ummah in Islam. Because basically you join the Ummah. The Ummah is this, as Dr. Arif alluded, I think, the Ummah is this community of believers that transcend time and space and context. You become a member of this Ummah as soon as you take Shahada. Because as soon as you take Shahada, you go pray. And when you pray, you say, إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ. You don't say, إِيَّاكَ أَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ أَسْتَعِينُ. You immediately join this community of believers who have believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala under any prophet. The Quran mentioned several stories of prophets and their followers, and at the end, in 2 ayahs, says, إِنَّ هَذِهِ أُمَّتُكُمْ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً وَأَنَا رَبُّكُمْ فَاعْبُدُونَ إِنَّ هَذِهِ أُمَّتُكُمْ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً وَأَنَا رَبُّكُمْ فَاتَّقُونَ. After mentioning the stories of these prophets and their followers, the statement is made that this is one ummah. So actually affiliation, affiliation and identity, gaining a certain identity by becoming member of this ummah is a huge part of the concept of ummah. And identity, by the way, is huge. يعني in the Sahifat al-Madina that Dr. Arif spoke of, it's stated that المسلمون أمة من دون الناس. يعني there is a uniqueness about this ummah, about those believers. يعني. And I think it's hinting that although, yes, we are members of this never-ending ummah of all believers, but those who share time and space have certain accountabilities as members of the current ummah. So, if this concept of affiliation is so important, how is it relevant to our reality today? I think we can all relate to the fact that this global ummah of ours, this global affiliation of ours that we're talking about, there is actually another global identity that is very powerful in our lives, and I think we need to acknowledge that. If you are anything like myself and my friends here scattered around the room in our office, one of the things we do on a regular basis is we check the latest movies from Hollywood. We have fights about Barcelona versus Real Madrid. We talk about, Coursera and what you learned recently and so on and so forth. Everybody's on Facebook, and there is an enormous presence of this global reality, of this other affiliation that we are all parts of, which poses a serious problem, I think, when you think about it from an ummah perspective. What if this other global community is driving in a direction of a different identity? If the two identities are not aligned, what would you do? That's a serious issue, by the way, for the concept of identity, of the concept of ummah. Let me give you two concrete examples. There is a very strong drive in the last few decades to replace the concept of a family, the institution of the family, with alternative arrangements. The demise of the family and the alternative arrangements are in direct conflict with what this ummah stands for. So what would you do when you deal with this reality? You are part of this community, and you are also part of this other community that's driving in the other direction. The other example is this very powerful drive, and we've seen examples of it at the highest level of nation states and their rulers and so on recently, to try to redefine what a Muslim is in terms that are more fitting for the interest and the perceptions of superpowers, whether it be international or regional. There is this drive to make sure that when you think as a Muslim, you are not that hating person who rejects Israel, for instance. Let's redefine what it means to be a Muslim in their education, in their schools, and in their mosques, in their khutab Jum'ah. Let's just make sure that whatever these people get exposed to doesn't get them to be that hateful human being who doesn't accept everybody like this. So there is a drive in that global community to redefine who we are. And there is all kinds of drives, of course. I'm just citing these two examples, but it's an overwhelming reality. A lot of the components, a lot of the presumptions of this other global community are not necessarily aligned with our identity. Actually, they are in direct conflict with it. A huge question is, what is our stand regarding these tendencies? In the case of the family, for instance, is the best thing we can do is to build. I lived in the West for long, and even in my own country, is to try to build those nucleus communities and try to protect certain kinds of families within this community. Try to make sure your kids go to Islamic schools, not to public schools, so they don't get exposed to drugs and stuff like that. Is the solution to build bubbles and hope that with living in those bubbles we may protect the concept of ummah, at least at a minor scale? Is the solution to mount a fight with the social elites and the political elites in our countries who are pushing for that concept? is the solution to mount a bigger fight on a more strategic and political level with the system, as Dr. Arif, I think, was alluding. What is the solution that will make our identity and our affiliation as Muslims comfortable with this kind of conflict? When you, as a Muslim person, and when you, as a researcher, go after these kinds of questions in detail, then some aspects of the concept of Ummah, some aspect of this new paradigm that we're pursuing are going to become clear. Because the way we approach it is going to clarify something very important about this realization. Of course, the bigger question here is how can the concept of Ummah work conceptually, psychologically, institutionally, etc., when Muslims are surrounded by powerful systems, players, institutions, and identities that come out of a different belief system, of a different value system, and reflect different historical experiences that are not necessarily aligned with us. This is the bigger question. Wasiqat al-Madina that Professor Arif referred to, it says very clearly that there is an ummah min al-Muslimin or ummah min al-Yahud, and how for them to not just to coexist, but even to partner. So this concept of ummah does not prevent us from being part of broader realities of other ummahs. Yani. But the precondition in Wasiqat al-Madina was that the ummah of Muslims was recognized by the ummah of al-Yahud as legitimate, as strong, as the base. Now it's the other way around. How would we, as Muslims nowadays, pursue this concept of ummah in this different reality, when our situation, that put it this way, is not the upper hand, it's the lower hand? That's an interesting question in terms of our own affiliation. And sometimes the question of identity and the question of affiliation and stuff like that is not best discussed at global scale. Sometimes minor examples work. I look here at Istanbul. I've been here for 4 years. I look at us here, Muslims in Istanbul. Many of us here come from different countries and different backgrounds. And I have this question. What are we doing to build this community here in Istanbul? If Ummah is a community of believers, fine. In Istanbul, we have a mini community of believers. What are we doing to break the barriers between us, to break the barriers between us and the society that we live in, to build institutions and take initiatives and take different steps to actually make the concept of Ummah, with all its values and institutions and so on, a reality? And by the way, I don't see much of a structural problem here, preventing us from doing this. There isn't a political system that's preventing us. There isn't, a security apparatus that's going after us if we go and attend meetings. And so what's going on? I think we need to address these questions because they will give us clear clues as to the current generations of this ummah and how they think and how they act and how they behave. Only when we do that, then some of these aspects of this paradigm of ummah will become clearer, because this paradigm of ummah is going to be carried by whom? By these people. Okay? That's just an example. Now, let me move to a question a little bit broader than immediate affiliation, the question of development. Okay, let's say you're a scholar, or let's say you're a student right here at Zaim University, interested in the subject of national and regional development. You are driven by the ayah, وَلْتَكُنْ مِنْكُمْ أُمَّةٌ يَدْعُونَ إِلَى الْخَيْرِ وَيَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ. So you're really driven. Let's talk about development. Turkey has had an amazing experience. Malaysia has an experience. A few Muslim countries have really succeeded in making great successes when it comes to developing their countries. Here's an interesting question for you, though, as a scholar looking at these issues. And by the way, since I was part of that effort, We also need to build plans to develop countries of the Arab Revolution. It's another issue, but I just have to say it. Yeah. The question is, to you as a scholar, what kinds of models have you seen utilized in these developmental projects? What are the developmental models behind these successful experiences? And what is the scope of these developmental projects? And is the concept of Ummah, does it have anything to say to us about these two aspects, about the model of development and about the level of development? If you think about the concept of Ummah and how it relates to the model, the concept of Ummah will bring with it a completely different set of values, ideas, attitudes, ideals, and so on, that come along with ideas, the components of the Ummah itself. You will have to deal with the question of istikhlaf, with the question of i'marul ard. These are accountabilities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put on humans to develop this universe in very specific ways, according to very specific values. Have these developmental projects that we label as successful in our Muslim world, have they made use of this broader concept of istikhlaf and i'mar and so on? Or have we followed, as Dr. Arif, and I keep referring to him, the typical capitalist model, even with some of its harshest versions? If we haven't considered these models of i'mar and istikhlaf and so on, then we are not really utilizing the concept of Ummah to the question of development. The second issue is the issue of level of implementation. Are we thinking of countries? When I think of development and dream for a developmental approach, am I thinking of Egypt, or which is my country, or am I thinking of a couple of countries around us, a region? Or should I be thinking along the lines of the Ummah, of developing the entire Ummah? And by the way, Ummah in Islam, again, if we go back to the basic foundations of the concept, it's very interesting that the Ummah is not only confined to the believers, because the order in the word in Ummah is tad'u. And if you are going to make invitation, if you are going to invite others, then, like Dr. Muna Abul Fadl, mashallah, has very brilliantly noticed, everybody on the planet is either member of this Ummah or a potential member of this Ummah, because you are either a believer or you are being invited to join this belief. So when you think of the level of implementation of developmental projects and you say it's at the Ummah level, then I have to ask the question, are we thinking in our own universities, institutions, think tanks, ministries of planning and all these places, are we thinking about an Ummah level development in any one of these experiences, or are we thinking at a national level? And if we are thinking at a national level, how can we combine the two? Again, the new paradigm of the concept of the Ummah will not flourish only because we consider the idea of Ummah when we make humanitarian work. This has always been something that annoyed me, to be honest with you. When we go about humanitarian work, relief and so on, we're always thinking of the Ummah. Let's go rescue our brothers and sisters in whatever country and so on. But then when we think of development, I don't know where these brothers go. In spite of the fact that the very simple fact that we all realize that unless we actually develop all this Ummah, we will always have humanitarian crises and problems at hand. So it makes sense that your level of analysis and as a scholar and your level of implementation as a policy maker when it comes to development, take both sides. Let me not say ignore development at a national level, but take also the broader Ummah level with you. Are there enough scholars among us here who are willing to do research on evaluating the developmental projects that took place in these successful Islamic experiences on the basis of these two issues, on the basis of the model of development stemming from the Ummah concept, and at the basis of the level of development stemming from the Ummah concept. I think if we do that, we'll have a new breed of research and thinking that will definitely add to this emerging paradigm of the Ummah. Because the emerging paradigm of the Ummah has to do with the Ummah now. I'm going to speak this. I'm a very animated speaker, so. At least let me suggest that the Ummah be one of the levels, not necessarily the central level, not necessarily the only level, but one of the levels. When we do implementation work and when we do research work. I thank my brother Hassan, Imam from our center, for preparing this presentation that make me look much better than I am, in terms of organization. It looks very organized. It's his work. And if you see any problems with it, it's his mistake too. The third area, which now is getting a bit at more hotter areas as we go, affiliation, then development, then protection. The whole idea of protection and defense of this Ummah. How does the concept of Ummah help us when we think about defending ourselves and protecting ourselves? I suggest that the concept of Ummah helps us in better defining our priorities when it comes to what to protect and what to defend. Should we favor the types of defense and protection that stem directly from the Ummah type ideals, values, interests, and so on? Values like freedom, goodness, تأمرون بالمعروف, righteousness, collective accountability, inclusion, all these concepts of the Ummah. Shouldn't our fights be to reinforce these values rather than engaging in fights that are basically sectorial fights or territorial fights? And if we have to engage in both kinds of fights, shouldn't the Ummah concept prioritize the first kind of fights and give it a higher stand? I see something like the amazing Arab revolutions that took place a few years ago, and all of a sudden people are flooding us with sectorial fights and this energy is disseminated. Is this right? Are we smart to let ourselves go down this path, take this huge energy that's maybe the most amazing exemplification of how to build an Ummah by going and sacrificing our own lives to defend freedom, and all of a sudden we're defending sectorial, and this energy is disseminated? Again, the concept of Ummah, I think, if we think about it carefully, should help us at least prioritize these conflicts. Maybe practical reasons will force us to go through some sectorial fights and so on and so forth. That's understood. But in terms of priorities, I think we need to keep this in mind. And then I have a question for you. When you think of protection and defense and so on, we know a lot about how to build the strength of a country. We have been witnessing it for centuries, But do we have enough scholars thinking of how to build the strength of an Ummah? What are the components of building the strength of an Ummah of believers? Psychologically, intellectually, materialistically, institutionally, and so on and so forth. I think it's time we build models. How many times have we gone to workshops and seminars and so on in which people gave us all these accounts of balances of power between nations and between forces and so on? Very rarely would you hear anything about the power of the Ummah. And I really suggest that some of us would engage in this amazing activity of defining models of the power of Ummah in our current times. What would build a modern strong Ummah? How would it look like? Where would it start? Does it start with education? Does it start with social media? Does it start at the family level? Does it start with, thank you. Does it start with materialistic things? Does it start with development? There needs to be some intellectual work done to address this question. And when we address the question of what to protect and what the model of strength looks like, I think the question of how to protect becomes easier to handle, becomes more relevant. I really feel very bad about leaving ourselves and our youth to a miserable choice of either engaging in the wrong fights, sectorial and territorial, etc., or if you're going after the rhetoric of this Ummah and Khilaf and so on, joining in lunatic endeavors with obscured religious foundations, savage tendencies, and complete lack of vision, all in the name of Ummah. No, I think we have an obligation to build proper models of what the strength of Ummah looks like, so we don't fall, and our youth doesn't fall for this stupidity. And finally, let me talk a little bit about another domain. They are not in any particular order, or do not even follow a particular intellectual discourse. But this is a huge idea of institutions and structures in our life. Again, this is an area that's worthy of our Ummah lens. Let me suggest 3 institutions for you. Let me start with what we have always been talking about and suffering from and so on. And to a large extent, we have sort of come to take it as a necessity. I'm of course referring to the nation state. And what I'm simply saying is, it's one thing to recognize the prevalence of the nation state. It's another to think that it's an inevitability, an eternal inevitability with all its components and makeup and all its deficiencies and so on. If we apply an Ummah lens and ask ourselves not how to fit our Ummah to the system of nation states, but how to evaluate the system of nation states by our Ummah standards, then we'll have a very different perspective. And we'll add to our paradigm of understanding our Ummah. Maybe even more seriously, from my opinion, and I'm biased because of my field, the institution of the corporation. We are not paying enough attention to the relation between this institution, the corporation, and how resources should be handled in an Ummah. If you look at this carefully, you will see completely different realities, and this is another thing that's worthy of our attention. I'm going to mention a third one that's much closer to home, because nowadays, in circles inside the Ummah, there is this debate about the Islamic movement. I'm sure you were all part of it and heard of it and stuff like that. And at the core of that debate, people are now debating whether the organization and the structure and so on of the Islamic movement, al-Munazzama wal-Jama'a al-Islamiyya and so on, is relevant anymore. I watched this debate very closely, and I can tell you most of it is following a closed loop logic. People are asking, is the organization of the Islamic movement good or bad, given internal dynamics within the organization? Its structure is hierarchical, decision-making is slow, and so on and so forth. This kind of internal logic. I suggest we pose the question as follows. Is this organization fitting the Ummah needs anymore? If the Ummah calls for inclusion, is the Islamic organization of the Islamic movement inclusive? Is it open? Is it smart? Is it indulging us to the right kinds of values? If it's not, then we need to look at it with this lens. Okay, again, our understanding of this concept of Ummah will improve when we apply questions like this to questions that have to do with our daily affairs like this, and examine what it means to think from an Ummah perspective about these things. Let me finally end by saying the following. Pursuing a new paradigm of the Ummah or not pursuing it is actually a choice. It's like joining the Ummah itself, by the way, يعني لا إكراه في الدين. So nobody can force anyone to join the Ummah. Nobody can force anyone to adopt a new paradigm of Ummah either. It's just a matter of your worldview. If you think that the world is okay now without the Ummah of Muslims, or without this Ummah we're talking about, then don't worry about any of the stuff I said today, any of that stuff in the conference. يعني. But if you really think there is something major wrong with the world today, in the current status of the Ummah, of Muslims, then it's high time we put a lot of energy, both practical and intellectual, to it. Thank you very much.
Okay, I want to thank both of our speakers for their very thoughtful and insightful remarks. I think there's a lot for us to think about here. Before we kind of open it up for question and answer, I just want to tie the two papers together and maybe get some reflections from both of our speakers, as well as Dr. Al-Arian, who's going to be joining us for the discussion. So one of the things that I noticed is, Dr. Arif, in your presentation, you started with the idea of an economic monopoly, but that developed into recognizing that economic monopolies often lead to political hegemony. And then Dr. Hussein took that a step further and recognized that economic monopolies and political hegemonies also often lead to cultural hegemony. And when we think about talking about the Ummah from an Ummah perspective of inclusion, affiliation, development, and protection, I think part of the difficulty is for Muslims living under economic monopolies or political hegemonies or cultural hegemonies, what we have is a focus on the individual and a focus on the local. And when we are trying to say there needs to be a solution from an Ummah perspective, there seems to be a very big gulf that we have to start thinking about. So when the results of political issues or economic issues, cultural issues, is a focus on the individual and a focus on the local, how do you think that can be transcended to then thinking about this global Ummah? And what would that process look like? So maybe if we can start with some reflections on that and see where that takes us.
Yeah, thank you. No, of course, individual is important, their education and changing consciousness. Colonialization in Muslim world affected mentality of Muslim too. And they are Muslim, they do believe in their religion, even they are, practicing their ibadah, but mentally they couldn't, produce a new system. Because, improving, educating individual necessary, but it is not enough. The institutional structure also should be changed. The prevailing institutional structure of Muslim world is copied from West. Western institutions are based on different worldview, on different paradigm. And they accept powerful people to run the country. But in our mentality, the good people, or the people who has consciousness of Tawheed and Adalah should rule. When we imported Western institutions, there was a duality between individual and system. And people are Muslim, but the system is not based on their worldview. Owing to this reason, Muslim couldn't come together with rulers and to solve their problem. Until recent change, great majority of people was afraid of the state or police or other official offices. In recent years, since the mentality of rulers changed and people come together and supported the state, but still we should restructure our own social structure according to our own belief. Because the understanding of state in Western power is different, in Marxist system is different, in our system is different. In our system, state is, we call Kerim state. State is helper, is not ordering, it is serving the people. It is based on hadith, Sayyidul Qawmi Khadimuhum. Your rulers are your servant. And in our mentality, state be with the people who are weak, as Khalifa Abu Bakr explained in his first khutbah. He said, "Oh, you people, I would like to let you know, in our society, the rightful people are powerful. If they are weak, if they have no any supporter, I will take the power of the state and put with him until I get his right from oppressor." Later on, he continued, "Oh, people, you should know, in my side, the powerful side, if they are not rightful, they are weak. I will take the power of the state, put against him, struggle with him, until I get right of weak people from him." This is our mentality of the state. But in Western power, all they accept the powerful is rightful. Whoever has power, he is rightful. Because they do believe the laws of game are determined by powerful side. During Pharaoh time, the law of games determined by Pharaoh and his close family. Later on in Athens city-state, the laws of game put by aristocratic class. As you know, they had the right of electing, they had using democratic right. The laborers or the foreigners, the weak people, they hadn't the right of voting. Later on, during Roman time, nearly 300 families ruled the empire of Roman Empire, which lived nearly 1,000 years. When we come to Western civilization, after the, during the mercantilist time, the rules of game put by merchants, and they, developed mercantilist mentality. During the time of industrialization, and large firms determined law of game and law of distribution. During our time, financial monopolists are designing the main principles of how they will rule, how the economy should be shared. And as you know, World Bank and IMF established for this aim. I think you can remember the speech of Lord Keynes in House of Lords. He said, we should establish these two institutes in order to establish balance between our interests at the global level. That is their mentality. Owing to this reason why I say we should turn our own paradigm. In our own paradigm, it is duty of the state to open way, to prevent monopoly, and to educate people in order to develop consciousness of Tawheed and Adalah. We have two basic paradigms in Islam. One is Tawheed, Tawhid means La ilaha illallah. There is no any power who are giving basic human rights. Ilah means giving and taking. Only there is God, Allah. The second, we should come together, the main paradigm, study, produce, then we should distribute the surplus with our own will and consent. Government shouldn't intervene with our economic activities. These are main understanding. We should, teach our people this basic paradigm. Why, for example, terrorists are coming out in Muslim world? Because they are not well educated. And owing to this reason, they don't know basic Islamic principles. Islam is the map way of peace. And with the support of colonial power, they use force in order to get their right. That is not Islamic way. Because some of the people are not educated very well. Yeah, thank you. Sorry for speaking longer.
The level. The concept of ummah is not tied to any particular level. If it's not done on the collective community level, then it's not done. Actually, fiqhiyan, establishing the ummah is fard. And when it's not there, it becomes what we call fard ain on each one of us. This is why there is this prolific ayah in the Quran that describes one individual as ummah. Inna Ibrahima kana ummah. Quran words are extremely, extremely accurate, precise. So why was Ibrahim an ummah? Because in the absence of this collective reality, Sayyidina Ibrahim did three things. And this is a clue to how the ummah works on the individual level now. Number one, he had this unequivocal belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, amazing belief. Number two, he followed the rulings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with no, to the point of killing his own son. And number three, if you know the history of the seerah of Sayyidina Ibrahim, he toured the entire known world at his time, inviting people to Islam in all corners of the world that he knew. So if we combine these three things, we can become an ummah at the individual level. This dedication to certain beliefs and values and behavior based on them, and calling people to do that. I see in our recent history, so it wouldn't be like a very abstract discussion, Dr. Sohaira. I see in our recent history here in the region two epic events, that most of us in this room were part of, that tell you that this ummah is very alive at the individual and group and even larger levels, The Arab revolutions and how the Turkish people stood to the coup d'etat last year. You should have been here, it's amazing. So this ummah has the energy behind it at the individual level and at the group level, even if the institutions are not sanctioning them. Even when Islamic institutions themselves were hesitant about the Arab revolutions, people went to the streets. So my point is, yes, it is a collective entity. It's a community, but every one of us is supposed to work on building this community in his own or her own way, depending on where they live and what they can do and so on. Definitely people who live in the West are not going to have the same accountability as people living in Turkey or people living in Egypt. So I think that's the question, the bigger question in what you're saying. I would take it and turn it as follows. What is the individual accountability of each one of us in our own different regions and circumstances and ages and, all these conditions to carry out this fard? So definitely if it's work on the individual level, on the local level, then it should be guided by the concept of the ummah. My problem, because I lived in America for long, my problem is not with that. My problem is with the community. They're sleeping. If you start giving up some of the key foundations of this ummah, then there is a problem.
What would you say are the key foundations?
Oh, the key foundations of this set of values of inclusion, of inviting people, تكن منكم أمة, all these 6 or 7 things يعني. If you start sleeping on that and you start accepting يعني other kinds of values as your basic value system, then there is a problem. And I think Muslims in the world should talk to each other a little bit more in terms of what they are doing to build this ummah يعني.
Our 2 speakers basically raised questions, important, significant questions, and I'm just going to add to these questions, not answers. I think there are 2 significant works on the concept of the Ummah at opposite ends that one could look at. One by the late Dr. Ismail Farouqi, a very distinguished scholar, who died in '86. In his book, At-Tawheed, he talks about what he calls political order, economic order, social order, world order. And if you read each one of these, the central theme of each one of these orders, what he called ummatism, the central concept of the ummah. And he gives definitions as well as principles. It's called principles of political order and so on and so forth, in which he tried to define the meaning of the ummah in different fields. On the other hand, you find this recent work that Sohaira mentioned by Jamil Aiden, who is professor also of political history, historian at University of North Carolina, in his book, The Idea of the Muslim World. And he thinks it's an invented concept, actually. It didn't exist in reality. It's a concept. It's only about 150 years old, and it's been propagated by 2 opposite ends, the Islamophobes or the imperialists, those who are trying to push this for their own interest, and what you call the Islamists, or those who have political projects based on the faith, who are trying to romanticize this concept of an ummah, again, for political purposes. Now, looking at these 2, obviously, you need to reconcile what is the meaning today of the Muslim Ummah, because we have a historical meaning, but that historical meaning, a romantic one, is it spiritual, is it political? When you look at the Quran, both terms, when they mention in the Quran, they both actually refer to acts that is not political, unless you want to expand that meaning. Abudun at-taqun, worship, be pious. At the same time, when we discuss the concept of the Ummah in reality, is that we had this maybe 100 years, 130 years, the first 130 years. By the end of the Umayyad dynasty, we had several ummahs. We didn't have one. There always was more than Khalifa, more than ruler, more than Sultan, more than one person. And what was the political role? When we look even at the Ottomans, at their height, after they conquered Istanbul and they were there in 1492, what was happening in Andalusia at the same time, who were pleading, obviously, with the Ottomans to come, but there was nothing coming to their aid. So what is the real meaning of the ummah, both at the political, economical, spiritual? These are social. These are the kind of questions that we really need to look at, especially in the age of a nation state. You cannot escape this. All the people who write, especially related with the Muslim ummah, they want to jump over all this and try to create a world of dreams that doesn't exist in reality. We have a nation state. We have the concept of citizenship. It is no longer a faith-based situation where you say he is my a member of the ummah. So it has to be redefined in a way that it could accommodate these realities. We can't jump over this. Yes, a community of believers, but which believers? Is it a value system? We know we have. Maybe we can look at it in 2 systems. One system is a dialogue, which is based on the secular notion of a man-nature dialectic. Another one is based on revelation. There is something metaphysical. There's God-related. There's another value system that is based on revelation, whatever that revelation might be, especially if they come from the same source. So perhaps we need to look at that and see what kind of a value system, what kind of a new paradigm can be looked at that can represent ummatism in the words of Dr. Al-Farouqi. I don't want to take too much time because we're really running out. But it's a very important concept, and I hope, again, scholars would look at this in a deeper way that Dr. ElKazzaz and our speakers here looked at, so that we can answer this question that is related to reality. The reality is that we live. You know, it's not enough that people obviously sympathize with Bosnia and Burma and Afghanistan and Somalia and so on and so forth, but at the end, does that constitute the Ummah? Obviously, it's a failure on that level. Anyway, I'm going to turn it back to you. Basically, we have 8 minutes.
Okay, so with 8 minutes, let's try to take 2 to 3 questions from the audience. So we'll start here. So one, do we have a mic that can go around?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll start here. We'll collect them first and then just direct it to whichever speaker you would like to answer.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you to everybody for having us this evening. It's an honor to be here. I have a question about liberal humanism and the direction that some of our ideas of the Ummah are moving. And I can sum it up maybe in an anecdote from here in Turkey. I've been doing research on Muslim humanitarian work here and the response to the refugee crisis. And I asked an elderly brother who had donated a number of homes in Kilis to orphans. I said, what did you read? What has motivated you to do this sort of work? Because I found him to be a man of deep faith and great practical action. And he said something that I still can't answer 3 years later. He said, you know, I read everything. He said, I read Shariati, Al-Banna, Maududi, Khomeini. And, you know, to just put those together is already a challenge, right? And then he said, but Maulana had it right the first time. Insan, Insan, Insan. And for me, it was a great moment where the Islamic humanism that came out was very real and tangible. But I hear that humanism elsewhere. And when I come to try to develop it, and I hear it in places like the Sharq Forum where I just came from, quickly it becomes a Protestant Islam. It becomes a powerless Islam. It becomes a humanism, and only a humanism. And I wonder how we can reconcile being a service to humanity as an ummah and speak in the level of humanism and still preserve an Islamic identity. Will we not just surrender ourselves to a liberal Protestantism?
To whom he asked question? Yeah.
Who are you directing your question to?
Yeah. Okay, go on.
So let's just collect one more, or maybe 2 more, and then we'll try to answer them all.
Thank you. I have a question from a theoretical point of view, because Dr. ElKazzaz mentioned about level of analysis, and he would like us to use Ummah as a level of analysis, while Professor Sami, he distinguished between 2 kinds of concepts of Ummah: the classical Ummah and the national state, where we don't have this classical Ummah. In theory, we have 3 levels of analysis in international relation. We have the individual, and the individual still exists. We have the state still exists. And we have the international system, and the international system is there. If there is no ummah currently, how we can use the concept of ummah, or the ummah as a unit of analysis? Dr. ElKazzaz raised a very interesting example about the Muslim community in Istanbul here in the last 4 years from his own experience, where we have Egyptian, Syrian, Iraqis, Palestinians, Yemenis, but all of them, they are living within their own national state. They are living, for example, Egyptian, they do their own events. Syrian, they do their own events. So the concept of ummah, even among this mini ummah concept here in Istanbul, is not exist. What shocked me, and I would like to share this with you, I'm sure as you have been 4 years here, you noticed this. Salat, in particular Salatul Eid, Bayram Salat, is Jami'ah. Now each community in Istanbul, they pray their own Salat. You go, you see the Egyptian, they pray their own Salat. The Palestinian, they go and rent their own halls to print their own Salat. So what I'm saying, you are asking us to use the unit Ummah as a unit of analysis, where there is no Ummah in the 20th and the 21st century. So how I can, as a scholar, use Ummah when it is dead? Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
One last question right there, and then we'll wrap it up.
It's a simple question, and for both speakers. Where do you put the organizations that we have today, like the Islamic cooperation, the Islamic states of cooperation? It used to be called cooperation, now it's something like this. Does it have any meaning? Does it have any role in our work today?
Okay, so do you guys want to?
I'll take the level of analysis question. You take this.
Do you want to start?
Yeah, okay. Let me start with the meaning of Ummah. As you know, before Prophet Ibrahim, peace be upon him, people managed and organized with their own tribes, own clan. First time in human history, Prophet Ibrahim called people to unite in Iman, in principle of believing, in thought, in, main speaking points. Then establish institutions based on Iman, on fiqh, on thinking, and on discussed ideas. Owing to this reason, we defined Ummah. Ummah is a unity based on same principles of Iman and have common thought principles, as well as who their kalam, their speaking also united in certain point, but their action is also supporting each other. I traveled all over the Muslim world, and I follow Muslim communities in West and East. Even in China, I visited Muslim community. Now, in Ummah sense, we have unity in Iman. Wherever I go, Muslims believe in the same principles of Iman, same conditions. A few small groups, they have some differences. For example, I visited a village in Tibet, Muslim village. They believe what we do believe here. There is no any difference. When we come together, we discuss problems, we have unity in thought. For example, we are against oppressors. We want peace. We want adala. Muslims when think the same thing. When we come to speak with you, like you, if we are using basic Islamic resources, there is unity in our speech. But when we come to action, we have a problem. Our action has no any relations with our Iman, with our thought, and with our kalam. We have a problem in this point. We have unity in 3 areas, but we haven't unity in action. As our Ustaz explained, they pray Bayram Salah, Eid Salah differently, because their action, their mentality is coming from different implementation. Why we are not, we haven't unity in implementation? Because the prevailing institutions are not our own institutions. They are imported from Western countries. Owing to this reason, we, for example, use nationalism like them. In reality, in our belief, rationalism is not, it has no any relation with Islam. Whoever believe in Tawhid and Adalah, and we look at their deeds, if their deeds are good, they are good. We don't look at from which class they are coming, from which family they are coming. Of course, we accept people are created with different tribes, with different groups. But the unity, according to Hazrat Ibrahim, or according to all Muslims, the unity should be in Iman, in thought, in speech. We have unity here. Our institutions are not developed according to our Iman, our thought, our discussed points. We should change this institute. You know, good people couldn't do everything when the system is corrupt. People should be good, should be educated, but system also should be changed. For this reason, how the system will be changed? Scholar should try and develop new model of reorganization. Of course, in the past, we established unity with our own institution. But during that time, institutions are based on the Muslim worldview. Now, the present institutions are developed in Western countries. Owing to this reason, the duty of scholar Muslim is very important. And now Ustaz is explaining the problem, or many of us, explaining problem. But we are responsible. Now, by criticizing Muslim Ummah, we should criticize us. Did we develop a new model and people didn't implement it? No, we couldn't develop. We all time repeated the Western theories, most of them produced for benefit of ruling class. We accepted capitalism as a natural system. Capitalism is not a natural system. It is a man-made system. All theories in capitalism developed for the benefit of the ruling class. In socialism, all theories developed for the benefit of the state. In our system, we should develop theories and solutions taking man at the center of all activities. Owing to this reason, that's my idea, you can criticize, scholars should produce solutions, not blame people. If they blame people, they will face the fate of Yunus alayhi salam. Thank you. You know fate of Yunus alayhi salam. Yeah.
I'll be brief.
Sorry for
no more than 16 minutes or something. Okay, I think there is a very important clue that we find about the concept of Ummah in the Quran relating to your great question, ya akhi. As soon as Rabbina subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, إِنَّ هَذِهِ أُمَّتُكُمْ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً وَأَنَا رَبُّكُمْ فَاعْبُدُونَ, the very immediate ayah says, فَتَقَطَّعُوا أَمْرَهُمْ بَيْنَهُم. The next surah, وَإِنَّ هَذِهِ أُمَّتُكُمْ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً وَأَنَا رَبُّكُمْ فَاتَّقُونَ وَتَقَطَّعُوا أَمْرَهُم بَيْنَهُم. It's very interesting. Allah is telling us, you are all members of this unending supply of community of believers. But he's immediately telling us that there is a very strong tendency for people to stray away from this community. And hence, there is an eternal sa'i for Muslim, an eternal struggle. It's part of our deen to bridge the gap between the basic concept of the Ummah, which, as Dr. Arif said, is a belief system. The Ummah is based on the bond of belief. But on the other hand, like you said, there are political entities, social entities, cultural realities, and so on, that not necessarily follow the same beliefs, values, and so on. And if you particularly focus on political institutions, like Dr. said in her first remarks, and Dr. Sami emphasized, you can hardly find now a political exemplification of this concept of Ummah. The tension between the core belief nature of the Ummah, the bond that's based on belief, and the varying degrees of exemplification of this belief in entities, in human entities, is actually all about our sa'i as human beings. This is how we make deen. So, and by the way, when I suggest that we use the Ummah as a unit of analysis, I suggest we look for exemplifications of this Ummah at the entity level with the logic of the Ummah, not with the logic of the West. Not necessarily looking for states and not seeing them and then there is no Ummah. But I suggest here for amazing minds sitting in this room that we need to articulate how this concept of Ummah is playing out in the real life of Muslims. And maybe there are interesting questions that we are not addressing. And maybe I'm obsessed with the Arab revolutions, but I wonder after tens of years of breaking down the Arab countries, how we revolted at the same time. There is a collective concept here, for sure. Although everything was done to break it. So there are these kinds of bonds, even at a collective level, that are not now mounting to political systems and political entities, part of our struggle, but they are there for us to find and build on. Shukran. Thank you.
Yeah, lady.
Do you want to say anything?
Yeah, lady, if you like. I want to, short time for explaining an ayah. Because I don't know whether I will meet such a huge number of scholars in the future. I don't know. The ayah is like that. Astagfirullah billah. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu lima taquluna ma la taf'alun kabura maqtan indallah. O who you believe, why you say what you don't do, what you take in action. This is a great sin. Some scholars, they say it is a great sin. Some mufassir say that will create a lot of catastrophe. Today, the problem of Ummah, they say what they couldn't implement. They speak, but their action is contradiction to their speech. Why this is like that? Because prevailing institutional structure is not developed according to Muslim worldview. And owing to this reason, let me repeat again, this is our duty, all scholar of our time. We should produce solutions which can be implemented. We are servant of Western capitalist institutional structure. It is based on power and injustice. Thank you.
Thank you very much for our first panel. We really appreciate your contributions and your chairing the session. And as a token gift, we have some gifts here. First to Dr. Ersoy. This is the plate. Our logo on it.
Thank you very much.
The front.
Oh, okay.
Front to take
If you can
picture.
front, you want to take some pictures?
Sorry?
Please, if you can
Come over then.
But all
Please.
of us should
The
be.
three of us.
One by one.
Okay.
Dr. Hussein, if you can please in the front.
Yeah. Lady, come.
And Dr. Sohaira.
Ön tarafa alalım hocam, orada bir fotoğraf çekelim.
Aşağı mı çek?
Şöyle ön tarafa alalım hocam. You may go also.